Our next speaker is James O'Donnell, who is University Librarian at Arizona State University and Chair, Board of Directors of the American Council of Librarian Societies. Aside from now being head of one of the most largest and the most dynamic university libraries out there, Jim was provost at Georgetown University for some time. He's also a very well published and very highly regarded classical scholar. James O'Donnell.
Bernie, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I could just say that I agree with everything that's been said so far today and get us out of here, but I think I have a couple of additional things to say that I hope will be useful. Bernie asked me to speak from the perspective of a working scholar, which I still am, and from the perspective of a librarian, which I am now. I discovered the change happening in me when I brought my 30 cartons or so of books to my new office in Arizona. And for the first time in my life, found myself surrounded by people saying, "Do you like help shelving those, please?" Hadn't happened before. When I go to the world of knowledge beyond me, a world concentrated in libraries, I have a very simple desire. I want access to a completely comprehensive collection of everything everybody has ever thought, said, or done that has made its way into some semi-permanent form of writing or recording. Seamless access, I can call it, to a comprehensive collection of the world's cultural heritage and product. That is an overweening ask, no question about it. And yet, we do already have a remarkable facsimile of that in our control, and it has changed dramatically in my professional lifetime. With all the anxieties that we bring to bear, we should remember that we are in the business of miracles, and miracles happen all the time in our facilities. My new university, Arizona State, is a mere child in the world of universities. Founded as Arizona Normal School back in the late 19th century, it became Arizona Teachers College, it became Arizona State College. It only acquired the name university in 1959. It's quite remarkable that our central library building, my shtick of the moment is it was already named then after the person I hope will be our next Librarian of Congress. It's Hayden Library. Was built in 1966. It was the most amazing piece of hyper-modern architecture anybody had ever seen on that campus. A thing of brutalist beauty, if you can call it that, in its time. We're looking forward to having the 50th anniversary party this fall and bashing into the walls with sledgehammers next year to start a major renovation project, good Lord willing, the creek don't rise. But even though we are that new, only in 1980 did we get a vice president for research and begin seriously chasing research dollars. We have half again as many volumes as were in the Princeton University Library when I became a freshman. And I thought that was the most amazing thing I had ever seen in my entire life. And I was correct, as it happened. And we can do anything. Our ILL folks made me smile yesterday, I said, thinking of this talk. So what's the toughest, coolest, neatest thing you guys have found lately? They smiled and said, oh yeah, it was that volume of subversive Romanian poetry from the Cold War days that we tracked down in the State Library in Bucharest, and they're sending it to us, and we're going to have a happy camper here who will be able to study Cold War subversion in Romania in a way not possible before. In Tempe, Arizona, for crying out loud. If that's not a miracle, I do not know what is a miracle. The libraries we pass through are miracles in their own right, and I want to speak here for a moment to what I think is the vital beauty and importance in our libraries of all the books that neither I nor anyone else will ever read. That's a tough sell beyond our tribe, but I think it's an important sell for us to make. Human beings have created remarkable products over centuries. Many of the things that have been done don't need to be done again. In the somewhat Borgesian taxonomy of the books on the shelves in my office, I have about 4 shelves which count as my bedside reading pile. They're all the book I'd like to read next. One of them is a 1920s history of, yes, little theme here, Romania, that I discovered existed a while back. It's a classic of the genre. Cambridge Press reprinted it a few years ago. I got to buy a copy. it sits there beckoning to me as something that I should read. I've got a pretty decent idea that I might not ever get around to reading that, and that's actually just fine. I'd love to read it, but it's just fine if I don't. But it's even finer that I can have it and think about a world that is enriched by its presence as it sits on the shelf talking to me. It is making me aware of and think of things that I wouldn't think of otherwise. And it's already done a significant piece of its work. It was worth buying just for that, even if I never touch it again. So when we think about the diligence we owe to our print heritage, I confess to complete orthodoxy in all the matters that have been discussed today. My unorthodoxies will crop up a little later. Yes, of course, absolutely, we should preserve it all. I understand that preserving it all means throwing away lots of it. That's a complicated case in its own right to make, but it means applying the intellect and the will to understand what a comprehensive collection would look like, what it takes to preserve, protect, and defend all of the content, all of the forms, while recognizing that not every physical artifact ever created can live forever. I plan to live forever myself, but I recognize that there are others who won't. The form and the format in which this content comes is of very great importance. The content, I think we have to admit, is greater still. That is to say, just as in the Middle Ages, copying the manuscript over and over again gave you the book, even if many physical objects had been lost in the meantime, so too in our time, finding the appropriate way for material to survive, independent of form and format issues that may be difficult to deal with, is yet more important than maintaining the objects, the physical objects themselves. So absolutely, we must preserve. I will just underscore what Deanna said by emphasizing what I call the crisis of the 1960s in this regard. In the 1960s and 1970s, university libraries, particularly research libraries, began buying lots and lots and lots and lots more stuff than we ever saw before. There was a chart this morning that showed the boom in publication post-World War II. All of that stuff is getting older. Think of those as baby boomer books. If any of you know any baby boomers, you know they're getting older. If you think of the books that are coeval with baby boomers, they're getting older and more tired. They're all going to need to see the doctor sometime soon, and that's going to put a pressure on our ability to manage those artifacts like nothing we've ever seen before. But preservation, at best, is only a means to an end. The end is not even just the survival of the objects. It's the human space in which we live and move among these objects, intellectual and physical objects, and think about them and use them to make our lives richer, to make our planet safer and healthier, to sustain the civilization that we have. That means we need to be absolutely committed to preservation, and we need to be absolutely committed to access to the materials that have been preserved. And that access is transforming rapidly around us. It's a miracle that my ILL folks can bring in the book from Romania, of course, but it's even more remarkable what we can do with the everyday things around us. When I describe our high-density shelving module to our remarkable and immensely supportive president, he says, "Oh yeah, that's your fulfillment center." Gives me pause when he says that, because just across town, Amazon has one of their largest fulfillment centers, and they are our competition in an interesting way. Because it's the state of Arizona, 2/3 of the population lives within about 20 miles of that fulfillment center. And so repeatedly, if you are an Arizona customer for Amazon, you order things on your Prime account for 2-day delivery, and it shows up later in the afternoon, on Sunday afternoon, for that matter, because it's only 10 miles away across town and the truck is going out anyway, so what the heck, they deliver it. At that point, when I explained to one of our faculty members that the lovely Borrow Direct program, ours is Borrow It Now program, that we have with the Great Western Library Alliance, can deliver anything from the 32 libraries of Gwilla within 5 business days. They say, 5 business days? I say, okay, it's usually 48 to 72 hours, and they feel a little bit better. But Mr. Amazon is competing with me by group delivering stuff to me at any given moment. Mr. Amazon also does something else very smart. He puts buttons across the screen that say, you want it tomorrow, you want it the next day, you want it the day after that, click on one of these buttons. Library traditional cataloging and searching is more like Amazon Marketplace. You know how it is in Amazon Marketplace. You want to buy an over-the-counter cold medication, and you've got your Prime membership, and you discover that you can get it for $5.99, okay, plus shipping. Or else it's $7.99, okay, but it's Prime, you can get it without shipping. But when you click on it, you find out that it takes 3 days to prepare it before they can ship it for the 2 days, and so you go back clicking again, trying to find out which deal. That's what we make it like now for our faculty and students. When they go to our catalog to see if we have it, and if we don't have it or it's checked out, we then send them on that kind of hunter-gatherer search to understand Borrow It Now or Interlibrary Loan or Article Reach or Occam's Reader or whatever the other tool or technology might happen to be. I believe, and I've got folks working on this, that we need to get to a single panel of buttons that just say, we've got it on a shelf right now. You want it today? That's where you can go get it. Want it tomorrow? Click here, we'll deliver it to you. It's checked out. Click here, we'll get it for you in 48 to 72 hours without making you understand Borrow It Now, Interlibrary Loan, any of that other kind of stuff. I'm even going to suggest to my folks that maybe one of those buttons on that screen that we provide on our library screen should be a real Amazon button. And that says, okay, we don't have it, we can get it for you in 48 to 72 hours, or click here, buy it for yourself now, take it home, have it delivered to you by Amazon tomorrow. Lots of issues raised when you begin to think about doing that. But if you go around and take the user's point of view, I want this object and I want it as rapidly as I can, that's one of the choices they're going to make. If we don't provide the option, they're going to be leaving our interface to go look for this thing someplace else. And by that time, we've lost their attention. In a world in which we're competing for people's attention, maybe we should make it a little bit easier for them to keep their attention on and with us. So I believe in preservation, I believe in access, but that means I believe in one more thing equally absolutely, and that is what we used to call browsing and what we now call discovery. I believe those two activities are fundamentally related. I've only recently realized that the physical books in our libraries, when they're in our libraries, can best be described as discovery tools. Because when you went to the traditional stacks of the traditional library, before you pulled the book off the shelf and started reading it, it was talking to you. It was communicating to you information about itself. It was helping form your choices. And all of the nostalgic talk about browsing is talk about tools of discovery. Serendipitous tools of discovering, juxtaposition tools of discovering, logically organized tools of discovering. Imperfect such tools. The serendipity of the traditional stacks had a lot to do with the fact that the books were all assigned a single particular place, and you couldn't simply shuffle them for yourselves. David Magyar and I got in a conversation at lunch about my view of the superiority of the old Princeton cataloging system, the Richardson system. If we could have a fan club for the old Richardson system, it would be small but intense, because it put classics as a discipline together in one place. History, literature, philosophy, texts, and so forth, not Library of Congress, which has a whole different taxonomy of knowledge that is different and more difficult for the scholar to use. In a true world of discovery, of course, you could see them both ways. You could sort in different kinds of patterns. The traditional shelves don't let you sort in that kind of pattern. We have, I believe, new and better tools we can offer, but new and better tools we need to develop to make discovery as transparent, and indeed more transparent and more powerful online than you can have it on even the physical stacks of traditional shelves. But that has a profound implication that I think we are still wrestling to come to grips with. Two implications, really. The first is that real preservation, real due diligence to preserve the print heritage of our culture has very little to do with physical objects, very little to do with preservation as such. It has everything to do with the social tools and the social commitment we bring to believing in keeping and using materials and providing the social structures around those materials that make them genuinely used. Physical survival of books today is, in itself, almost literally meaningless. It is a means to an end, and unless we pursue that end, the physical survival of the books means nothing. And even the physical survival of the books and the presentation of those books in our libraries means less and less to more and more of the people who come through the building. I've been thinking lately about the category of prophecy which consists of an old man saying, this will happen in the future, when what he should really be saying, what I should really be saying is, this has in fact already happened around us and we old guys just haven't caught on to it yet at all. The physical books that are in the stacks of our libraries are today increasingly invisible to the students who walk through those stacks. They know less and less about how to navigate that space. They know less and less what to do in them. They choose those. Mike Furlow's analogy from 20 years ago was a perfect example of that. They are less and less inclined to spend the time and the effort looking in this particular way than they would otherwise. We have millions of invisible, unused books on the open public shelves of our libraries. At this point, a digital representation of one of those books that leads you to order it from a storage facility 500 miles away is a better tool for the preservation of that print object than the object itself is if it's on the shelves in stacks that students are not comfortable, are not regularly using themselves. And in my first months at ASU, I used to walk our stacks. I grant you we are not Swarthmore, we are not Princeton. Probably different results would occur in some other places. But I would walk our stacks and come back and report that the maximum, the minimum, the mean, the mode of the number of people who were working our stacks looking for books at any given point was 1 on a business day. The stacks are not in fact working as a tool now. Even when I have faculty members say to me, we must have the stacks, we must have browsing, the next sentence is always of the form, I don't get over there as much as I used to myself, of course, but it's really, really important. And it's really, really important for the students to learn how to do that stuff. Though I have yet to find one who confesses that he or she has actually brought students into the building and walked them around and shown them how to do that and inspired them to do that or given them lessons and ways to do it. We need to find ways to make that material alive for students, or all of the efforts we're talking about trying to preserve it will be impossible to fund, and I will return to that theme. When I look out beyond the present moment of the prophecy that's already come true, I have other things to worry about. 10 years, 20 years from now, there will be students, by which I mean there are already students, who don't know what print really is, who have no affection for it, who have no comfort with it, who do not understand the way in which a culture for thousands of years made itself around the written word. That's a cultural loss in general, but it's a practical loss in particular. It means there's information they don't know how to get at. If they are comfortable finding the information using the best tools available to them, the digital tools, of course, and those tools don't find that information has disappeared already and needs to be brought back or needs to be surrendered. But I worry about other people. I worry about ourselves. I worry about us as librarians, with our finance officers sitting over our shoulders whispering to us, who are increasingly focused on just-in-time collection of materials, patron-driven acquisition, without recognizing always how much implication that has for the future of any idea of collection, of creating that world of vitally important material that is vitally important even when it is not being read. We have depended for a very long time on the phrase that provides one motto for preservation: lots of copies keep stuff safe. That's another way of saying that when Clint Eastwood came up to us and said, do you feel lucky, punk? For the last several hundred years, we've said, yes, we do feel lucky. Everybody will go out and buy a bunch of stuff, and it'll all take care of itself. We've gotten a little better at paying attention to how we make sure that everything gets into the collection one way or another. But if we all retreat into ourselves, and we all develop a focus on just-in-time acquisition, on patron-dependent acquisition, we will be creating holes that we don't know we're creating. And the worst risk we face is one that I think was already visible in the earlier talks, the risk of not knowing just what we've lost because we haven't paid enough attention to it lately. I do worry about the university provost. I'm happy to say that I don't have just a good president, but I have a very good provost. And my predecessors trained him well by making him serve when he was deputy provost, making him serve as interim librarian before I came aboard. There's bad news to that. He knows where the bodies are buried. There's good news to that. He knows where the bodies are buried and is sympathetic when I have to undertake an exhumation project. But hear this, the moment we as libraries stop providing a solution to a problem the provost already has, the provost is going to get a lot less friendly. For the last sort of short generation, we've all been able to build off-site shelving facilities. When I got to ASU, almost all I had to do was raise my hand, and next week we're doing the groundbreaking on 2 modules of off-site shelving facilities. Because I was solving a problem for them. I was enabling them to repurpose central campus space for student success and for student life. When I run out of the ability to solve that problem, I know what my successor is going to hear, in Arizona particularly. You've got how many of those in buildings of what size? Air conditioned to 50 degrees, for crying out loud? Sorry, Mr. Librarian, your carbon footprint is just way too big. You're going to have to do something about that. And those nice benevolent provosts who've been building the shelving facilities for us will turn on us unless we have a good story about just what we have, just why we need it, and just what those facilities are for and what they may be. I have one more worry that's relevant to a topic that's come up a couple of times today. I worry about the Library of Congress. As I will say again a little bit later, I think the Library of Congress and the Librarian of Congress can be and should be of help to us in these areas, of help of a kind that we have not for the last years been able to depend upon. I worry particularly that the worst legacy of the last administration of the Library of Congress may be the loss of faith in the positioning of the Copyright Office inside the Library of Congress. Take that Copyright Office outside LC, and I think we're all in a world of hurt, and I wish we could have avoided getting to the point where that's being taken as a serious possibility. Well, from my fears and my ambitions, I draw 2 lessons that I want to make the main point of my talk. First, if we are now talking about shared responsibility for print preservation, if we are all under pressure to show and demonstrate the use of what we have, then we are already building, whether we know it or not, a national collection in our libraries. I think we should acknowledge that, embrace it, recognize it, and organize ourselves to build that national collection. I gave a talk a few weeks ago to a New America Foundation in Washington, where they wanted me to describe the library of 2100. I made my theme a question of how many libraries would exist in 2100, and I said I had 2 answers to that question. One for the planet was 3 million. I got to that number by taking the ALA's number for number of libraries in the United States per capita, multiplying it by a population of 9 billion, which is an optimistic number for 2100, and you get about 3 million. I'd like there to be 3 million places on the planet in 2100 where you can go and find librarians. But I said the other number, besides 3 million, is 1. That is to say, if we are sharing responsibility, we are sharing collections, if we are providing digital access to collections, then it will not make sense for different individuals in different places and different locations and different cultures on the planet to be differently advantaged by who they are and where they are in the world of libraries, when it is possible, and I think therefore necessary and desirable, for us to consolidate our understanding of how we control that world, wherever the objects may be, wherever the digits may be. That imposes upon us an obligation for cooperative collection development. I'm the new kid on the block. I recognize cooperative collection development has been talked about before. I praise what Bar Direct is being able to do with creating the shared collection specialist position. I've raised the question of CCD with my colleagues in Gwilla, and there was good news and bad news. The bad news was a bunch of people around the table who shook their head and said, been there, done that, RL deconspected, blah, 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 blah. You know how that conversation goes. I was cheered by the fact that 3 different really smart people came up to me at the break afterwards and said, don't listen to them, let's talk. Because I believe that at this moment, with the tools available to us, we don't just have an opportunity to engage in cooperative collection development, we have an absolutely unavoidable obligation. And let me put it this way. No one outside our tribe understanding, however superficially, what we have in front of us and what we can do, will for a moment accept that we cannot engage in cooperative collection development on scales well beyond what we have ever accomplished in the past. It simply will not be a story we can tell. Folks will believe it, and I have different perspectives and different histories on this. I don't think any provost should believe it. I think we need to do that work. But there's another piece of that story which Mike Furlow's talk well illustrated. The other collection I want to draw, and I'm glad conclusion I want to draw, and I'm glad he has emphasized it already. I strongly believe that the salvation of print in our time and for the future consists of digitization. And I don't mean this as a preservation statement. Yes, bringing physical objects together, conserving them and preserving them as best you can, and providing digital backup copies is a way, of course, of preservation. No question about that. But let me go back to what I said earlier. The student who comes to our university and who goes looking for a print book today that has no digital representation will not find it. The digital representative of the individual book needs to be there as a vehicle to keep the individual book alive. I'm having a conversation now with the family of a beloved former teacher of mine who passed away a few years ago, who published in the 70s and 80s a 5-volume masterpiece of a work. It's the kind of book that 100 years ago would have stayed on the shelves and been used for 2 or 3 generations, and deservedly. It's a book that's now disappearing because it exists in the world on library shelves, in used copies available on Abe Books, and in paperback edition from the university press that published it 30 years ago. There is only one digital representation of this in the world, 2 that I've been able to find. And both of them I have found on libgen.io. Don't write down that URL. It's completely bootleg, of course. It's the bootleg sibling of Sci-Hub. If you want that 5-volume set in digital form, you can find it in the original English and in, this theme reverts, Romanian translation of all things, on libgen. But you cannot find it in or through our libraries. It's a masterpiece of the kind that a wider intellectual public can and should read and benefit from, and it's a work that is becoming invisible. I'm saying to the family, if you want his legacy to live, this book needs to be digitally available, and indeed better for the family, better for his reputation, better for his legacy, that the volumes be available through the most open form of access and the most standard kind of format, most widely and broadly available, or it will disappear. That's what I mean by saying that if those books remain only in hardcover and softcover and in print, they will disappear, and no matter what you do to preserve them, no matter how many copies stay alive in buildings around the United States and Romania, that book will disappear. It will lose the influence that it can have. So I will summarize my fears, my expectations, my argument with my hopes. First, yes, we must accelerate cooperative collection management. That is to say, the work of understanding what we possess, what condition it is in, how we can care for it best, how we can use our distributed repositories, those shelving facilities we are now building. We're a receiving facility for West Trust, and I'm happy to do that, and we must accelerate it. If I had suggestions for how to accelerate it, I have one symbolic example. Every time another library in West identifies a volume or set of volumes that will be transferred to ASU's building to be made a part of the permanent collection of the West Trust Preservation Project, a form shows up on my desk. It's the official donation form in which the institution that is transferring the copy needs to make a donation of this material to Arizona State University to hold in perpetuity, and I need to sign a form in order to let that book into my building. That is a bureaucratization of this process that is not helping to accelerate it in any way, shape, or form. I take that as a symbol of the challenges we can create for ourselves with old habits when there is an urgency coming over our shoulder that we need to respond to and cannot afford those old habits. Yes, we need, second, to engage in cooperative collection development on a level that we have not done before. When our books increasingly move to off-campus facilities and are served from our fulfillment center, there's an opportunity that will be, to some people, a difficult sell, but I think a necessary one. You can see this in our Borrow It Now service from Gwilla. When you search a book in Gwilla for Borrow It Now, you get a list of the institutions holding the individual title. And it whirs and clicks for a minute, and then it tells you how many of those are requestable. This is patron-initiated ILL. So you click on the request button, it automatically fills out the Iliad form, you hit one more click, and the book shows up in 48 hours. It's another miracle. But what you notice when you look at this is the number of requestable copies there are, time after time after time. There's lots of requestables at any given moment. Let me go back to the print book as a discovery tool. As long as our primary discovery tool were the print shelves in our stacks, then all of those requestable copies were necessary. In order for, somebody pointed to this on my shelf the other day, in order for the Pulitzer Prize winning biography of Willem de Kooning by Annalyn Swan and Mark Stevens is on every shelf in open shelves, it's discoverable in those places. But if we come to a point at which those copies of that book migrate to remote shelving and are accessed electronically, they cease to function as discovery tools. We don't need as many of them around as we once thought we did. How many we need? Very good question. But we don't need every single copy on every single shelf in every single library, even of Pulitzer Prize winning biographies of major contemporary artists. The good news is, particularly with our Borrow It Now, which has a relay system, we can get pretty good quality data on what's going on with our Borrow It Now requests. And I'm told now, this is late news from the front, that even Iliad can show you call numbers of books that you've been requesting. I'd been told that this was impossible. Apparently it's possible, but nobody's ever taken advantage of it. What this means is that we can do a better job of tracking both what our patrons are using. I want to use it as collection development information. If my people are ordering lots of ILL books in call number ranges we're not strong in, I should know that. But it also means that we can, at the level of Gwilla, for example, which is 32 libraries, we can think about our cooperative collection in a way that we were not able to do so even 2 years ago. Third thing we need to do and hope for is mass digitization and the discovery tools that come with them. I could live for a while with on-the-fly digitization, but in fact, in order for the discovery tools to work, we need for our library catalog to be able to provide you information about new books that is of a quality with what Amazon and Google Books already provide you with Google Book snippets and with Amazon search inside the book information. I have long since lost count of the number of my scholarly colleagues who brighten up perceptibly when I mention Amazon search inside the book. They say, oh yeah, I use that all the time to check footnotes and to look stuff up. And we start sharing search tricks for getting to look at the text that's on the pages that Amazon doesn't want to show you. Catch me aside afterwards if you want to know a couple of those tricks. There's ways to find and get at stuff that you can't get otherwise. When I have that conversation, the little angel over my head is saying, well, duh, you guys ought to be able to do the same thing in the library. It's a necessary and powerful tool. We do need the Library of Congress. We need it for its unique collections, no question about it. We need it also for its influence on copyright, to find the best ways forward, to allow us to respect the rights of authors and at the same time to help them find ways to make their material, make their lost loved ones' material more widely available. I am a profound believer in open access. I think I am the oldest open access journal publisher in the humanities anywhere on the planet, and I'm still willing to pay for stuff if I have to. I think the current fair market price of a 1960s popular novel that everyone has forgotten about is probably about 10 cents. You might negotiate me up to 15 cents, but I'd be willing to pay that kind of price, and I think there's a market you could make if you did that. The last thing I think we need to do is something I've not heard much discussion about, and that is be much more reflective and much more strategic about the books that we do keep in the principal facilities on our campuses on OpenStax for browsing. I'll push the question in two directions. Number one, what can we do to make our special collections more browsable? Strongly believe in the power of special collections to excite and animate our students and our faculty to research and inquiry that's not possible otherwise. We've got a gorgeous Arizona collection at ASU with all sorts of small press and ephemera and photo books and all just kinds of funky stuff none of which you could ever imagine just on the basis of a MARC record. You have to walk in those stacks to see these weird things, these big things, these colorful things, and we don't let you do that. It's special collections. It's locked away in the back room. I say, it's not the Gutenberg Bible. Isn't there a way we can have the semi-special collections that are browsable, so maybe you leave an ID card at the door, maybe your firstborn, something like that. But can't we work out a way to make those collections more the visible and usable collections on our campuses? At the same time, for right now, we're building 3 million volumes worth of off-site shelving. The papers of Barry Goldwater, John Rhodes, and eventually John McCain will use up a whole bunch of that space, okay. But we are looking to move to a point where we have no more than 500 to 700,000 volumes in our principal library. And I'm looking to my staff and my colleagues, but looking for help elsewhere, and I'd be happy to have conversations with any of you who want to get in on this, about how we do strategic zero-based collection building for that 500,000 volumes. Not the most popular, not the most frequently circulated, but rather the most provocative, the most interesting, the most academically successful. Someone mentioned earlier a practice of sending all new books in foreign languages off campus immediately. I shuddered when I heard that, but I've heard of famous libraries that do that. I understand why you do that, but when we bring an 18-year-old to a university, I think it's also very important that she or he learn how to walk in a space in which there's books in languages they never heard of before, and get a chance to take them off the shelf and look at them and say, son of a gun, you could do stuff with this. It means thinking creatively about the curation, the presentation, the library instruction, the interaction with faculty that could create a collection of 200, 500,000 volumes that would be interesting and provocative for faculty and students as a genuine destination to go to look at. Maybe it means we spend more money turning over that collection on a regular basis. I have a fantasy that you would do something like the semester of Italian literature. And you'd bring 100,000 books back to campus, and you'd do it with the Italian department, and you'd schedule lectures and symposia and exhibits and your rare book stuff. And then the next semester you'd take it away and you'd have a semester of Darwin. And a semester after that, you'd get other academic units volunteering to help you put on events animated by the books that you have. It's a different vision, I think, of what the books that will be in our buildings can be. I've been in too many libraries that have the old gentleman's reading room. My great friend Mike Keller created one on the top of the Bing Wing at Stanford a few years ago, and I've been teasing him about it ever since. You know what they're like. It's popular fiction, it's biographies of famous people, it's all in English, and it is surrounded by people dozing quietly. That's what those rooms are for. Can we not do better than that? Can we not create, for the future, a library that is a place for the print book, a library that is a destination and an exciting place, if a different kind of place, from the ones that we have known before? I think that's an exciting opportunity. I sent an email to a colleague a little while ago saying, you know, when I came in here today, I thought I was going to be the pessimist. Then Deanna started talking, and the rest of you started talking, and I realized I'm beginning to sound like the optimist here. But I'll be the pessimist again for a moment, and I'll be me, and I'll be the classicist. If we don't get our act together in the way that I and the others here have been describing, we do face genuine risk of cultural loss. And I think, of course, it's trite, but I'm a classicist, forgive me, of the fate of the great library at Alexandria. Now, we don't really know what happened to the library at Alexandria. That's one of the reasons it makes for good stories and lots of semi-bestseller books. Was it Julius Caesar? Was it the barbarians? Was it the Christians? Was it the Muslims? I have my own theory. I think it was the provost. Underfunding, questioning, pushing. Now, I have reason to believe, as Bernie has indicated, that provosts are, of course, by definition and by nature, profoundly wise and benevolent human beings who never err. But when they engage in activities that, for historical perspective, seem to be irrational, it is because they are the embodiment of the community of which they are part and for which they are responsible. They do not always have choices about what questions to ask, and they do have responsibility for making resource allocation choices. A failure of vision and will is a failure of community. If in fact we find ourselves achieving the kind of failure that we've been flirting with and glancing at and looking out at the corner of our eye at this afternoon, then I do not think it will be the fault, in fact, of Lynn Cheney. I do not think it will be the fault of the contemporary instantiation of Charles Foster Kane, whose name glowers at us through that window of our meeting room over on that side. It will be, Pogo will be right again. If we meet that enemy, it will turn out to be us. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Jim. We do have a little bit of time. We do be open to some questions. Good. Cool. Pass the mic if there are questions. We have a mic there. You can go ahead. David Mager.
Thanks, Jim. That was a great talk. David Mager, Princeton. So just a quick question. In the spirit of not meeting an enemy who turns out to be us, how do you craft a narrative? I understand you have a nice provost, but what is your narrative around the question that somebody or other is going to ask you, if they haven't already, that relates to quantification of use as relates to the contents, whether you digitize them or otherwise? You're spending money on stuff. Only some of it's getting used. Sue talked to us about the, only 1.5% of the remote storage stuff gets used in a year. How do you answer that?
1.5% level, yes.
Yeah.
I think that it's a tough sell. I think it's a reason for urgency. If right now our ASU collection, 4.5 million total, about 1.5 million off campus, one truck a day, 10 to 50 items per day. That's as nothing. But it also means we have done a frequency of circulation sort, and so we've got a lot of dead stuff that we moved off. We need to move off the better stuff, and second, we need to make it genuinely accessible and discoverable and browsable. And I need to say to, and I think we all need to say to the wise and benevolent provosts, so give us a little while. Give us 5 years, give us 10 years. But I don't think we've got a whole lot more than that before the question will be pressed in upon us. The way in which it will be most likely pressed in upon us is if we keep asking for more space. I got 2 more modules out of them. We can build to the horizon, it's Arizona, but I don't think they're going to be willing to build more than 1 more, and I'm not even sure of that. And I think we should treat this as our working physical limit and work for acquisition of digital materials. I have another rant I can do about why I hate the e-books that we're buying today, but I think we'll solve those problems, and we have to. And we have to make the stuff that we're keeping visible and usable, or we need to have a very good story about how we're consolidating with lots of other people so that we will, as a system, gain achievements, gain efficiencies of scale that we are not now capable of doing so. And hold out to him the hope that we can pull down one of those modules someday, or turn it over to him or her for some other purpose.
Hi, Jim.
Hello.
I think mine's more of just a statement that I think you might feel like you would like to react to. I'm so happy to hear your talk about provosts, and the role of provosts in moving this forward, because I worked at Georgetown when you were provost. And if people want to come and talk to me later about how that was, you can buy me a drink. So can you give us a little insight on that?
I think all I would say is that the provost is in an unenviable position. I used to be pretty good at seeking pity for the responsibility, because you've got all the strategic dreams and all the strategic hopes in an institution that is, American universities are this, uniquely well qualified to generate ambitions well beyond what we can ever hope to achieve. And we're all stretched. When I heard UCLA's story this morning, I said, yeah, that's an extreme case of what it's like. Empathize, because at Georgetown, as you all remember, we had 104 acres exactly, surrounded by glowering neighbors, and we had to make do making a world-class university in that space. My advice is respect, admire, love, and cherish your provost, and make sure that he, she, or it is as well informed and unsurprised as possible. And try to understand the pressures and the choices they're making, and realize you're competing in that space. And there is nothing, I'd love to compete in a space in which there were more resources and fewer opportunities for the person to be choosing among, but it isn't going to happen. So it's up to us to tell our story as best we possibly can, to make our buildings as lively and energized and energizing as they can be. We are moving to a big renovation, and so we've been doing the roadshow tour of Grand Valley and NC State and the places that have clearly succeeded in that regard, and I think we all have a lot to learn from those.
All right, thank you, Jim. Again.